1800. The one story that we know from that period is about Abraham Dollin's grandson, who's also called Abraham. He lived in this house with his family, and he was born with congenital cataracts. And at the age of 13, he was operated on by a famous London surgeon called William Cheselden, and the operation was written up by the philosopher Berkeley as the first operation to restore sight to a blind person. I don't think that's necessarily true. It was probably some useful publicity for William Cheselden, and of course many people had in fact been operating on cataracts for hundreds of years previously, but they were mostly women, and they didn't get written as curing blindness. But it's probably, we think from the historical record that the boy did have some sight restored, and he was able to see a bit of light and shapes. We suspect that the operation happened in the house because William Cheselden at that time didn't have operating rooms. That was before there was an idea of kind of professional operating rooms, and so he will have gone to people's houses to perform his surgeries. So we suspect that happened in the house, and I like to think about like what room that 13-year-old boy might have been sitting in when someone went to his eyes. But apart from that story, we don't have a great deal so far of research of that period. We know more about the house from 1800 onwards. So when it was sold in 1800, it was sold to a man called Thomas Black. He was a wine merchant from Geneva. Hello. That's okay. And it was sold to a family of wine merchants, and they renovated the house quite extensively. So we know that the original shape of the house was cube, and it didn't have any bay window structure. But in 1800, Thomas Black built a bay window that went all the way to the top of the house, and various internal renovations took place, which I can point out to you when we go round, including expanding the hallway, making some of the chimney breasts smaller, adding various fireplaces and decorative features that all date from that Regency period. Thomas Black died, and the house was inherited by his daughter and her husband, a man called Thomas Wilson. Thomas Wilson was a Conservative MP. He is the anti-hero of our story, or not even an anti-hero, just the villain. He was in charge of administering slave estates in Grenada. So the plantations where people were enslaved were administered by him. He administered their kind of profits through trusts that came through the London financial district. And he was responsible for putting to Parliament the Act that compensated slave owners for the loss of their slaves in the 1820s, the Reparations Act. So he wasn't, in my mind, a very nice guy. We also have a picture of him. He was extremely large, well fed. Yeah, just like modern day. Anyway, so then he was living in this house with his 7 kids until he died in the 1840s, and the house was inherited by his daughter, who sold it in 1860. By that point, Hackney had industrialised, so this was no longer a country retreat as it had been when it was first built. There was what's called, on the Ordnance Survey maps, you can see an asylum over the road, all sorts of factories being built in the neighbourhood, and it was no longer really a desirable place to live for the British upper classes. So it was sold to the Elizabeth Fry Society. Does anyone know who Elizabeth Fry was? People. So she was a prison reformer of the 19th century, probably one of the, well, maybe the greatest ever prison reformer. She was an extraordinary woman. She was a Quaker, and she managed pretty much single-handedly to introduce the concept of prison education and improve prison conditions for both men and women in Britain's prisons. She had died in 1849, and a society had been set up in her name, which was endowed by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, amongst other dignitaries. And they decided that in order to honour Elizabeth Fry, they would buy a building in London and create a refuge for women prisoners coming out of prison where they would be rehabilitated. And initially they bought a building down on the Triangle at the end of Westgate Street. You know, that row of terraced Georgian houses? Well, one of those was bought as the original Elizabeth Fry Refuge. but it was quickly too small for the number of women that needed help. And so in 1860, the descendants of Thomas Wilson sold this house to the Elizabeth Fry Society, and it became a refuge for women prisoners, which is how it's, in Hackney, it's well known as the Old Elizabeth Fry Refuge. And the refuge was here from 1860 to 1913, and it was inhabited over that period by about 10,000 women and girls. We have the archive at the Hackney Archives, including some of the letters that the women wrote back after they were released. And they came through the house. Some of them only stayed for a few nights, and some of them stayed for months. They were taught needlework, they were put to work in the laundry, and they were given the opportunity of employment when they left if they had good enough behaviour records. The house was managed by a matron and a deputy matron, and we have in the archives all sorts of really interesting details about kind of repairs that were taking place to the house. The constant sense you get from the archive is that the place was falling apart, that they were always struggling for money, and they were always doing patchwork repairs to try and keep it going. Then by 1913, they just ran out of cash to keep this building alive, so they moved to Islington, and the Elizabeth Fry Refuge still exists. It's now in Reading. When it was sold in 1913, it was bought by the New Lansdowne Club, who were a working men's club, funded by a brewery, and the house became the Lansdowne Club, which is well known to people in Hackney, and it was a club until 2004, although for the last 10-15 years of its time it was pretty decrepit and not much in use. And during that period all sorts of things happened in the house. They built a music hall, so you can see at the back of the house where the wall has been rebuilt, so where the red bricks begin there, that wall was rebuilt a couple of years ago because it had been knocked down by the Working Men's Club, and a music hall covered this whole area right to Granston Avenue. And the music hall, it was built in like the 30s, and it wasn't that great a building, but it did have a lot of murals and an interesting stage, and all sorts of things happened in it. So we know that the Cray twins came and boxed in it. There were lots of musicals put on, and talent contests and bingo night and all sorts. And it was a real hub of kind of Hackney's social life in the mid-20th century. During the war, the house was used for the Hackney Home Guard, so they were stationed here. A bomb went off on Mare Street in 1944, which damaged the front of the house, so some of the front brickwork had to be repaired too. Then in 2004 the Working Men's Club left and the house was abandoned. It was sold, thanks Lick, it was sold to a series of different developers who didn't really take great care of the building, and over time the roof caved in, some of the walls fell down. There was discussions about demolishing it. It was squatted on and off, sometimes by some really great squatters who did kind of community work here, sometimes by some less great squatters. And so there were lots of people locally cared about the building and hoped that it was going to be recovered. Eventually it fell into the hands of a developer called Carlton James, who built the building that you can see there. If you go around Hackney, quite a lot of these sorts of buildings were built by Carlton and his development company. So he demolished the music hall. He bought the land really only to build that. He wasn't interested in the house, which is Grade 2 star listed and is just a money pit, as my husband and I know. So he didn't really want to do anything with it. He got planning permission for it to be an office, and they were going to turn it into an office block. And that was during the pandemic, when the thought of offices wasn't so popular, and also it's clearly not an office block. So then my husband and I came along and we saw the potential of the place. I'm a historian by background. My dad actually wrote a history of Elizabeth Fry, bizarrely. So we'd always felt a kinship with the building. I'd always been really interested in it, and kind of from the moment we walked in, we thought, we've got to rescue this building. So it took us a year to get it off the developer. It was really complicated because of various conditions that were connected to the flats in the house. He was meant to have completed all sorts of restoration work on it that he didn't do, and we didn't want him to do because he wouldn't do it right, and then they got into fights with the council about that. So it was a really complex process, but after a while eventually we managed to buy it, and we then spent a year waiting for planning permission to turn it back from an office into a house and a community space. While we waited for the planning permission, we ran it as an arts venue, so some of you may have come to some of the exhibitions that we held here, and we painted the mural on the front wall at the end of the terrace. And then we've been restoring it for the last 2.5 years, and our builders are still on site. It will be finished in July, the residential part of it. So we're going to live in the top 3 stories, and the lower ground floor is going to be an art space for local people to use for workshops, events, exhibitions, supper clubs, like whatever they fancy really. So if you have any ideas, just let me know. I'll take you inside, but because it is quite delicate in there at the moment, there are rooms where we can't walk on the floor because it's being stained and there's wet paint on the walls and so on. I think we should probably do it in 2 groups. So if some people don't mind waiting out here, or flats, which was to build these walls and to sort of pretend that there was something like an old structure, so it's a bit of a fancy folly, but it's playful, and it gives us a little bit of privacy from the overlooking.
Is there any original glass from the original owner?
Glass? No. No, none of the original glass survived. So it's all of the windows have had to be replaced. I'm not sure any Victorian glass even survived. Okay, so first group. Back here was knocked out up to the original panelling. So we've maintained that piece of original panelling at the top and the bottom. But all of that behind is new. This room was completely open. It was the bar when it was the Working Men's Club. So we reinstated a bit of wall, and we're going to have some sliding doors. This is going to be our kitchen. Lucky us. Sort of embarrassed.
And you want to occupy this floor
and the 2 floors above, So there's a natural separation in the building with a separate entrance for the art space, which you'll see.
This Calvin. Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So what was there a portrait or something in?
There will have been, we don't
And that little room would have been?
Is one of the best preserved rooms of the house. It's got the original panelling, although we've had to re-add the mouldings to it. You'll see in each of the rooms that either side of the fireplaces there are these cupboards. They're the original wig powdering cupboards. So people would have powdered their wigs in these cupboards and also put their chamber pots in them. So most of them have windows.
What is a chamber pot?
A chamber pot that you pee and poo in when you don't have a toilet, because there are no toilets.
Do you know what a slipper bath is?
Yeah, it's like a shape of bath that goes like that.
Oh, okay.
We added this staircase here for fire regulation reasons. We were told we needed to have 2 staircases. We think there was a servant staircase at some point in this part of the house, so we managed to convince Historic England that we could add this one. And when I mentioned the kind of Calvinist architecture, what I meant by that was that there is not a grand staircase in this house.
Okay.
So you would expect a house
Was
of these...
this original shape?
No. This is a completely modern intervention by our architects. You would expect a house of this size to have a really big grand staircase kind of here, but instead the staircase is tucked to the side and is not particularly grand. It's wide, but it's got beautiful balustrades, but it's not a really grand staircase. And that's probably because the guy who built it, Abraham Dollins, was a Calvinist and wasn't trying to make big grand statements. Although
How do you
obviously
spell it then? D-U-L-L-I-N?
Dolins.
1 L.
Yeah. So, one of the only remaining original fireplaces in the house is in there. It's a little marble fireplace that you can see in that room.
Yeah, thank you.
Mural, which was painted by a mural artist from Brazil called Thiago Maza in 2023, depicts a hydrangea. The hydrangeas were imported to Hackney via Loddage's nursery, which was a very large nursery gardens, kind of the precursor to Kew Gardens, which was on the other side of Mare Street from the end of the 18th century to the middle of the 19th century. And that nursery imported all sorts of plants into Britain and subsequently into Europe. And hydrangeas were one of them. Hydrangeas come from Vietnam. This particular species comes from Vietnam and China. And on the other side of that wall is a Vietnamese supermarket, and this whole neighborhood has a lot of Vietnamese people living in it, so we wanted to honor our neighbors by painting something that related to their migration to Hackney as well as the plant's migration to Hackney, so that's what we did. None of these walls existed, so we've built all of these partitions. This was completely open, and it was the billiard room for the club, so they had big billiard tables, and it sounds like my brother wants to reintroduce a billiard table, but I'm not sure about that. And so we made this corridor, and when we talked to our architects about it, what we wanted to do was make sure that it looked modern, like modern panelling, so we're not trying to pretend like that this was ever the original floor plan of the house, because we don't know what that was. So this panelling is different and much plainer than the original panelling in the house. And then we've put these two rooms on either side. The floors are wet, so we're not able to really walk on them. But you can see again the examples of the cupboards on either sides of the fireplaces. So the house is funny because there remain these little bits, preserved bits, like this panelling is original 17th century panelling, but there's only this fragment of it, and then in the bathroom at the back there's a fragment of panelling. So the house has been, it's been played around with so much, so many times by so many different owners, that it's remarkable really that any of it survives at all.
What about photographs?
We don't have many we've got photographs from when it was a club, but actually very few, and mostly only of their beer storage, which was in the basement for some reason. There was a big survey done by Historic England of the basement of the house that was done in the 90s, I think, because that's where some of the most historic material remains, including one of London's oldest range stoves is still down there. But that
From what year about?
the range stoves is part of the 1800 renovation. But most of the stoves in London from that period were either replaced with newer models, or they were smelted down, or they were so messed around with that they're no longer really original stoves. But for whatever reason, the stove in this house remained in really good condition. We think that when it became a refuge, they moved the stove to another room, which is why it's preserved. And we can go down there in a bit if we want to have to see the thing, because it's the original. It's all original panelling with the original shutter and an original, a Regency wash basin that we have repaired, and we're turning back into a plumbed wash basin. It's quite a complex way to work out how to get a tap into what was not originally. If you look, when you're standing on the stair here, you'll see there are windows here, and there's also a porthole window up there. When this was a refuge, this top floor was used as the girls' dormitories, and we found quite a lot of materials hidden in the walls, little pots of face powder, greetings cards, little accounting books from the girls who were here. They kept them and they tucked them in behind the panelling in the bedrooms. So we found quite a lot of that material. So we know this was the dormitories, and we think that this cupboard was used by the matron, or perhaps the assistant matron, as a spy cupboard. They exist in some other institutional houses of the 19th century. So basically this is a sleeping loft, and they would have been able to sleep but still keep an eye on who was coming in and out at night, so they could see if anybody was leaving the building. So have a little look in there. It's going to be my kids' sleepover den.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You going there? But you can see the little institutional sort of fireplaces that the girls in their dormitories would have had. Tiny little cupboards.
It's
covered, isn't it? Got a glass.
Yeah, you can open it. We've got a ladder that you attach to the brass pole so that it comes close to meeting passive house standards. So it's airtight as far as possible. It's heavily insulated. You'll notice there are no radiators. It's all underfloor heated. It's heated by air source heat pumps in the side yard and solar panels on the roof. And it has a mechanical ventilation system. If you see in every room, there's a round, that one there. That is an MVHR system. So the pipes throughout the house are recirculating the clean air, which means that you can recover it and it's another way of making it more energy. It's becoming quite easy for how to renovate a historic building in line with contemporary energy efficiency standards. So the house will be extraordinarily efficient. Our heating bills should be pretty low, and it means that it's set up for the future. So it should last another 325 years, hopefully without too much major renovation. But part of it's been taken away for restoration.
Okay.
So there are doors and things. Yeah, and the builders they're warming their clothes by the stove. So yeah, the stove is currently under restoration. So the bits that are missing are with the restorer, and then he's going to come and put it all back together. And it's going to, I mean, he keeps warning us, it's going to look almost new when it's done.
It will look lovely.
It will all be blacked up and like, you know.
So this would have been the kitchen, I suppose.
So down
wouldn't it?
here, yeah, so this, the basement would have been used as the servants' quarters. And this was the original kitchen. And that stove was put in around 1800, according to the conservationist who's working on it. He says it's one of the oldest intact stoves he's ever seen. Because, as I said before, mostly they get replaced by the latest model. But we think when the refuge moved here, they decided not to use this stove and moved it into another room. And this was blocked up, and so it was preserved, which is really rare. So the stove is part of the Grade 2 star listing of the house. And one of our planning conditions was that or listed building conditions was that we restored the stove, which we're very happy to do. So the floor that you're standing on, when we bought the house, there was about half a foot of concrete. You can actually see on the stove the mark where the concrete floor came up, and we didn't know what was underneath. We hoped that there would be flagstones, and so our builders took up the concrete, and what they found was that the Working Men's Club, this was their beer storage space, and they rolled their barrels in through these windows, and what they had done was pour concrete over rubble, and in the rubble was all sorts of old stuff, like old Pepsi bottles from the 50s that were still full of Pepsi, just all sorts of kind of rubbish, and they covered it up with concrete. And when we took it all off, we found the original flagstones. We have actually lifted all of them and put underfloor heating down here. So although they look like they've been here forever, they actually haven't. They've only been here for a couple of weeks.
You lifted them up and then placed them back.
With underfloor heating underneath.
With what?
Underfloor heating beneath. Yeah, so this downstairs area is going to be used for activities, workshops, events with the Hackney Society, whatever, comes along, really, we're interested in hosting.
Your name is Caroline?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Built without foundations.
Yes,
they just have corner, I can't remember the technical term for them now, but they're dug deeper in the corners, but they don't have any, so you can't lower the floors in the basement without underpinning, and that was just too much. So actually, I think the height of the ceilings is kind of okay down here, and it's fine. The door thresholds are quite low, but that's true to how they would have been in the past. So as you can see, the little remainder of the bay window that I mentioned when we were outside. Watch out. This is this will all be unblocked, so it'll be really nice and light down here eventually. And I think it's rather a nice sort of place to sit. I think my husband's a classical musician, so he wants to hold little chamber music concerts down here.
Lovely.
That behind you is going to be a kind of catering kitchen.
Sorry?
It's going to be a little catering kitchen through there.
Oh,
I
okay.
think originally it would have been a pantry.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of these little rooms in the middle of this space that would all have been used for storage. Some of them cold storage, some of them room temperature storage. They're funny little spaces, and yeah, we're not sure exactly how to use them, but that one is going to be a kitchen, and we've got toilets and a shower in another one of them. It's almost as intact as we possibly can, so we're not going to paint any of the panelling, we're not going to paint the fireplace, we'll very lightly plaster the walls with a kind of thin line plaster, but we're trying to keep it as original as possible. Two ivory children's pickup sticks that are probably 18th century. They were tucked away behind some panelling. A bit of Delft ware. We're always finding these
Oh,
pipes.
yes.
You can date them from the shapes of their
Wow.
bowls.
So how old are they?
These ones are, I think, 18th century.
Wow.
We found Victorian ones. I think the oldest one we found was dated to about 1720. This doesn't look like anything much, but it's actually the handle of a very old piece of pottery. Let's help you down. There we go. Of a 19th century, 18th or 19th century bottle of wine. Right. They were really thick, kind of primitive. It's the base of an old bottle of wine.
Yeah.
You think that downstairs, I see it's...
So they're handmade, and they would have been stuck in with
This is for
pegs.
what?
These are just things we've found in
I know, but you
soil.
think it's...
Roof tiles.
Yeah, roof tile.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
We've got a lot of them. So when these are things that have just come out of the trench that we've been digging, old earthenware, pottery. We've actually found some things, some more intact things that have gone off to the conservationist, and they're going to be brought back, and we'll put them in a display box. So
This is really a big, even